I'm Louise Calloway, and I'm the founder and executive director, I guess what you call me, of the Underground Railroad here. I think when you're about 8 or 9 years old, you get an idea, a little bit of what you want to do for your life. You don't realize it then, right? But when I was 8 or 9, I read a lot, and I was interested in history. During the summers, I would sit on my grandma's porch and just read while the other kids were out playing. And I got a sense of what Africa was like from what I was reading. In high school, I was kind of lazy. I, just went along. But my favorite subject was social studies and history. And I just didn't do too much. And when it came time, to go to high school, I still was kind of lazy. And I was not thinking about going to college. I was thinking about just getting a job in an office, getting married and having children, and that would be it. But after near graduation time from high school, my aunt's friend, who was a graduate of Morgan State University, encouraged me to go to Morgan. And that was a real change. The community that I grew up in was predominantly a Black community. And it was like a village. Everybody knew everybody. But when I went to Morgan in Baltimore, it was a new education altogether. The first thing I was told by my aunt's friend, when you get off the train, there are going to be taxis waiting to, take you to the school. But the yellow cab will not take you, so don't bother, right? And that was the beginning of an education in racism. I married and a man that I met at school, and then subsequently divorced, and I married again. And the man that I married for the second time was a man who was really interested in history, And we had children, and I found myself going to historical places. He would take us to places like Underground Railroad, places like in Canada, He would take us to some of the places that we heard about during the Civil Rights Movement. We went to where Harriet Tubman was born, Plantation. At that time, though, people weren't talking too much about Harriet Tubman. There was grass growing all around, and we were talking about how terrible it was that people had let that, place be that way. In Canada, we went to one of the biggest Underground Railroad churches, and he just took me all over, took us over, all over, me and my children. I didn't really know what was happening to me at the time, all that together. So we moved to Canada, and I don't know how I got the money, but I opened a Montessori school. The neighborhood that we lived in we lived outside of Montreal in a place called St. Bruno, and it was like a middle-class neighborhood, but it was mostly French. And so I don't know where I got the money from, but I opened up this Montessori school. And the French people would send their kids there to learn English, and the English people would send their kids half day to learn French. And it was amazing. One day a young man, Black African, came in. He was from Cameroon, and he said that he wanted to, mentor some kids. He was good at mathematics, and he was going to one of the universities there. So the people in authority gave him to me, and I welcomed to my caseload. He was teaching some of my kids math. And he subsequently became like a member of our family. this young black Cameroonian. He'd come out on weekends and everything. And before I knew it, we were contemplating going to Cameroon. So we thought, we could go to Cameroon and our children could learn a lot. And that's what we did. We said, well, maybe we should visit the country first before deciding to, take up our stuff and live there. So there was a festival being advertised. It was called Festac. It involved all the black countries and the African diaspora countries, and it was held in Nigeria. So we went to see if we would like Nigeria. And then if we liked Nigeria, we felt we'd probably like Cameroon too. So we went to the festival that lasted a whole month. We liked being in Africa and Nigeria. So when we came back, we just packed up our stuff and we headed for Cameroon. Wasn't that something? We went to Cameroon, we got jobs teaching 3 different places. And we lived in Cameroon for 3.5 years after living in Quebec for six years. And then my mother was sick, so we came back to the States after 3.5 years. I had all this stuff in my head about history and stuff and about our ancestors. And my daughter was older. I think she was about 14 then. So we used to go to Philadelphia, South Street. And there was a young black man who owned a coffee house there, and we'd go to his coffee house and just, sit there and drink lattes and stuff and watch the people go by. And in his coffee shop, there would be speeches of Malcolm X and stuff and, music. And then I said, where we live, we don't have that in Willingboro or in the area where we lived. Where we live, people are standing around waiting for us to leave or, we don't feel that comfortable. So I said to myself, it would be great to have a coffee house where we could go and see images of ourselves and our heroes on the wall. And we could have music loud and messages by Martin Luther King, loud so people passing by could hear. So that was on my mind, and that's how when I had the money, I developed the Underground Railroad Educational Center coffee house in Burlington City. About 7 years we were there. And it was history, it was everything. A lot of people coming in, enjoying it. And then it got to the point where the board that we had thought that we should do something a little different. We were just giving the money to the landlord. We should have a place of our own. And they kind of departed. I couldn't. I had spent so much money, and on furniture and everything, and fixing the place. I just couldn't walk out. So the board moved. So I spent maybe 1.5 years there without a board, and then I decided I better move too, because there are people coming in with different agendas. And so I took my stuff and moved and took all the stuff and put it in my garage in my house. We had a friend who was a newspaper reporter, and she hadn't seen us much. And she called me and she said, I want to do a story on you. Take some of your stuff, put it in your living room, I'm going to come around and do a story. So that's what she did. And as a result of the story, many municipalities offered us, places where we could have our educational center. But the biggest offer was from the freeholders, Burlington County. And they said, we have a place for you. But it has to be, remodeled. But in the meantime, you can be in one of the buildings that are here already, but they're in disrepair. So we accepted the offer. It's a place of learning, connecting the past to the present. That's what it really is. In that way, you're making people aware of what happened in connection, with what's happening now. The media and the school system has not always told the true story or the real story about our history. And it's important that people know. So that's what we try to do here, to tell the true history as much as we know and as much as we're learning. We're still learning because there's so much stuff. And we think people, regardless of what their backgrounds are should know the true history of African Americans in America, in the world, really. And that's what these images on the wall are for, And that's why it's important for our children to get here. Because the stories that are told about our ancestors don't deliver the kind of pride that, they should have about themselves. But if they knew the true story and knew what our ancestors went through, not only that, but how they handle themselves, they would be really, really proud of who they are, We're some amazing people that come through here that can tell their stories. That's important too. People come in and they tell their stories. That's why I love being here. Like earlier, a man from that had an Asiatic background, we were talking, like we're talking now. And he was talking, he had his boy, and he was talking about how his ancestors came to this country and to work. And they were told that they would never be able to be citizens of this country, and how they're treated now. And then we had two older men who said they were in the Holocaust and, how they were. So people get a chance to talk about what happened to them and their ancestors, which I think is important too, And that's one good reason why, we're here.